Thank you everyone for coming. Welcome. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Margot Wolf O'Donnell. I co-chair Benesch's Labor and Employment Group, and I've been at the firm for a year now. And one of the things that drew me to this firm is their commitment to women attorneys, supporting their growth at all levels of the profession. And also, I am a former president of a large women's bar association, and so is Tara. And so, and many of the other women partners in our Chicago office have a lot of experience with women's initiatives. So when I came to the firm, we all pooled our ideas about what we could do to support our clients, women outside, in-house counsel, as outside counsel. And the idea we came up with was this B-Sharp group, which is a professional development group for women attorneys. And we've been working on this for several months now, and we're really excited at the for this event and what we've done to help women attorneys, and the general counsels that we have here as well. And thank you for coming.
So I'm Tara Camrat, and I was at the firm first, and I dragged Margot over, which is all good. And it's been a terrific experience in the actually less than 2 years that I've been there. So one of the things that I think we found the most challenging when we talked to people that had gone in-house was maintaining a network of people that are similarly situated. Sometimes you're the only in-house lawyer, sometimes you're part of a giant group. And so that was another reason why we wanted to just have a reason to assemble people that are similarly situated on a regular basis, so you can make relationships, improve your network. And a lot of times when you want to advance in the in-house field, you can't always do it at the company that you're with. So it's good to know lots of people and lots of places. Anyway, so thank you very much for coming, and we're going to get started.
Good afternoon. My name's Dawn Beery, and I'm a partner at Benesch's Chicago office in the Commercial Litigation and Product Liability Group. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I know everybody's busy, and I really appreciate all of you taking your time out. I'm not going to go into detailed explanations about what they've done and where they've been, because I want them to do that. But I will just tell you who it is that we've got sitting here today. We have Kristin Coleman here on the end, who is the Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Compliance Officer at US Foods. And then the third individual we have is Meredith Ritchie, who is the Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Ethics Officer at Alliant Credit Union.
Sure. And then in between, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Penninger, and I'm a partner at our law firm, and I do shipping law and transportation law. So in between Kristin and Meredith, we've got Deborah Rasin, and she is the General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer at Hill-Rom, and they make hospital beds and medical devices and other related items. And then we've got Mindy Sircus, and she is a director at Major Lindsey in Africa.
So we're going to get right down to hearing from the panelists. That's enough from us. So I'm going to ask a pretty softball question to get you guys started. The first thing we'd like everybody to talk about is just tell us about your current role at your current company and sort of the path that you've taken to get there. I know for some people it's straight, and for some people it's sort of wound all over the place. And as you're sort of going through that, there's one thing I'd sort of like for you to think about, which is there some move along the way that you think was really key to your success? And is there some moves along the way that you think, if I had to do it again, maybe I wouldn't do that? So that the ladies in this room can sort of learn from your experience. You could, if you want to answer both at once, or you could do them as separate, however you prefer. You want to start, Kristin? Just tell us about your background. We can do that first.
Okay. All right. So I've been out of law school for 25 years. So that's way too much information to give all of you. So I started off as a litigator, and this will maybe come back to part two of the question. So I started off as a litigator with a law firm here in Chicago, and then maybe I want to say 6 years in, I was getting married and I was moving to the West Coast, and I decided I was tired of being a litigator, and so I switched I switched firms and I switched practices. So I moved into the corporate department. And then I moved back to Chicago, and there's like this and that. And then eventually was recruited in-house. My first in-house job was with Brunswick Corporation. Shout out to the women from Brunswick who are here today. There are at least two. And I started there as a securities and M&A lawyer, and then because the GC who hired me had this belief that he had a very jump ball, Kelly's laughing, very jump ball mentality. So he liked to just say, who wants to be the environmental lawyer? So I did a whole lot of different things while I was there, including that role, as well as kind of a more business-facing role, and then back into corporate, and then ultimately the GC job. I left Brunswick after some number of years that I know I've forgotten to take the general counsel role at Sears. And I left Sears 2 years ago to take the general counsel role at US Foods. So 3 very different corporate environments, cultures, and businesses. That's all I'll say for now. Yeah. Go ahead, Deb.
Okay. So I'm the product of, the best laid plans never working out the way they're supposed to, because I am a planner, but all of my plans did not. So I'm not here because of great planning. In fact, I really should be in China, because that's where I started my career. I majored in Chinese in college. I went to law school. At that time, people were talking about, the Pacific Rim, if people remember that term. We don't really hear that very much anymore, but that was the term. And so I went to law school thinking I was going to be in the forefront of I didn't really know what M&A meant, but I thought, okay, I'm going to do sort of business deals, whatever that means, in the Pacific Rim. And so after law school, I went to an LA-based firm, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, because at that time, if you wanted to work in Asia, you went to LA, right? That was where the relationships all were. And also, Gibson Dunn was going to be opening up a office in Hong Kong and promised to send me there. So, long story short, they did. I went to Hong Kong. I spent 2 years doing their traineeship program. Then I went to Hong Kong, sort of became an M&A lawyer. Then, in Hong Kong, I met my husband, who was from Russia, had emigrated to Israel, was working for an Israeli company in Hong Kong, and was going to be sent back to Tel Aviv, right? So at this point, at 29 years old, I thought, yeah, why not? We'll just ditch my whole career, move to Israel for some guy who I knew for 6 weeks, and basically, why not? Did not speak the language, didn't know anything. Anyway, I joined a law firm in Tel Aviv. I worked there for a year, probably the most intense year of my entire life, because I got there at the middle of the beginning of the high-tech boom in Israel. So I literally, I went and I found out the top 3 law firms in Tel Aviv at the time. And I called them up, because this was before we had, phones with texting and email and stuff. And they all said, they heard Harvard Law School, and they said, literally, we don't even want to interview you. Can you start tomorrow? They were so busy with M&A work that they just wanted bodies to throw at the work, which is what I found out when I got there. I literally chose the firm that paid me the most. And I got there, immediately was thrown into, I think, 6 ongoing M&A transactions all at once. Anyway, I'm not going to talk more about that year unless you want to talk about it afterwards. But it was, looking back, one of the many formative experiences that I will, continue to talk about. Okay. After Tel Aviv, that really intense year where I was working about 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, I got a call from a recruiter, and recruiters feature very largely in my career story, actually, who was looking for someone to go in-house to General Motors to do work in China. So I thought, okay, this is my chance to get back to my passionate about China, do this, be in-house, do all these amazing deals. GM was going to expand in China. They wanted someone to do deals in China. The job was in Zurich, Switzerland. Yeah, then they also said, well, for your boyfriend to get a visa, like, you guys are going to have to get married. So I always tell him now, after being married for 22 years, that the only reason we married for 22 years is because I took this job at GM, which promised me to work on China, except when I got to Zurich, they said, oh, actually, we're really sorry, but we decided to hire this senior guy who was a partner at a law firm in Beijing to run China. We're not going to run it out of Zurich anymore. We're going to have a law office in Beijing. And this guy doesn't want any American expats working for him. He's going to hire all locals for that office. So can you not work on China? So that's what I call my ABC phase, which is anything but China. So basically, I spent 3 years doing M&A deals for GM all over the world, everywhere but China, really. Really everywhere but China and Latin America. Eastern Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Western Europe, all of Asia except China. So that was amazing. Anyway, then GM did a restructuring. They kind of closed the international portion of the Zurich office, turned it into only the European headquarters. So all the people who had been part of international were moved back to Detroit. I had never been to Detroit, well, except for GM business. So at that point, and apologies to anybody who's from Detroit here, I told my husband, okay, we're not living in Detroit. That's never happening. But GM will pay for us for our relocation, so that'll be a good thing. But once we get there, we'll figure out where we're actually going to live, but it's not going to be Detroit. Of course, we lived in Detroit for almost 10 years. So that's that story. And during the kind of 8 years I was there, I did everything at GM. They didn't really have a job for me, frankly, when I got there. It was a very flat structure in-house legal department. There was a general counsel. There were sort of 6 assistant general counsels, and then everybody else had the title attorney. And there were about 100 of us, and we were all we were loosely assigned to groups, but anyway, I did a ton of different things during all my time there, continued to do M&A, but also all kinds of other things, regulatory things. I told Stephanie for a while I got to be the main business unit counsel for the logistics group at GM, so I learned a ton about shipping and operations and all of that stuff, which I never would have known otherwise. Through that, I got to become the general counsel of a GM subsidiary. That was actually a joint venture with Isuzu Motors. They had a very close partnership, and they had formed a joint venture to manufacture diesel engines, actually in Dayton, Ohio. And just because of all the different work I had done, and I had gotten to know some of the people in that business unit, they said, hey, we need someone to kind of go and be the GC for this thing, because yes, it was a joint venture, but it was itself a $1 billion company, because it was self-funded, it was selling its own products to third parties, and they kind of wanted it to have its own corporate governance structure. So they said, hey, would you become the GC of this subsidiary? So that's kind of how that started. And then I started, I started to think, okay, what's next? I was in a very flat structure at GM, and like I said, you either could get one of those 6 assistant GC positions or stay as attorney, which was fine, but I kind of wanted a little bit more than that. So I started asking around and looking around, and again, to make a long story short, I reached out to a huge network of people, and I eventually got contacted by a recruiter who was, again, looking for a sort of unusual position, which has always been the case for me. I've found unusual positions that have been, maybe not everybody wanted it, So this job was to become the general counsel of Samsonite, the luggage company. The job was going to start in Denver, Colorado, but they were closing Denver. They were moving the headquarters to London. They wanted a US-trained lawyer who would move to London, but who would do so on a local package, no expat benefits, and be paid sort of like a local. You would not report to the CEO, you reported to the CFO. And they were kind of having trouble filling this job.
I wonder why.
And of course, I said, sign me up, you know? So that's how I ended up at Samsonite. I actually, the recruiter was based in London. It turned out he had a very close family friend who lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he paid an annual visit to that friend. And it just so happened that he was going to be paying the annual visit to his family friend in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and could we meet for lunch in Detroit? So I met him for lunch, and we literally had lunch and stayed until dinner. I got along with him that well. He's still a great friend to this day. And that's how I ended up at Samsonite. So I got to Samsonite, and the other thing I forgot to mention is that Samsonite had been close to bankruptcy, was listed on NASDAQ, but had been delisted because their stock price got too low and they had all kinds of problems. So they were being traded over the counter on the pink sheets. They had publicly traded debt, and they had a board that was made, they had an injection of capital from a group of private equity investors who then owned a slight majority of the shares. Okay, so we had a governance structure that was, the board was made up of 2/3 private equity investors, a consortium of 3, by the way. Then there were some board members who represented the public company shareholders, and then there were management, right?
So can I break protocol for just
I'm
a
sorry.
second?
I know I'm going on and on, but it's a long story.
It's a fascinating story, and obviously Deb took the job, right? And you all saw, I was like, gosh, that's a lot of factors. So what made you take it? Because that's, hearing all that, that's a lot of, was it just the recruiter who, again, was clearly not me, but obviously did a good job, but what made you see the opportunity there?
Well, it was an opportunity to become the general counsel of a public company. So yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be a tough situation. It was not your ideal, perfect situation to walk into. I will tell you, I went to London to do a house hunting trip, and there was no expat package. And my husband and I looked at flats, thinking, okay, we sort of did a budget and thought, what could we afford? And my daughter was 7 at the time. So that first visit, I just burst into tears when I found out how expensive it was in London and how much I was going to have to diminish. I sound like such a diva, but, to sort of reduce my expectations of what my quality of living was going to be. I mean, I thought, here's, you're a public company general counsel, and I was not living in a beautiful home. I would meet, it's funny, I mean, I would go to meetings and I would meet people who were my fellow GCs. Some of them I'm still in touch with, and they would be talking about their kids going to the American school, which I knew cost like 25,000 pounds a year or something, or they were living in Kensington and Chelsea and things, and I would sort of try not to talk about the fact that we sent my daughter to a state school, which was their equivalent of a public school, and we lived in a pretty modest London type of flat. But anyway, yeah. But I knew this was a stepping stone. I knew it was.
The role.
Yes, it did. It did. It absolutely did. And then fast forward, great experience, which I can get into at another time. Samsonite got bought out by private equity at that point. So they bought the remaining public shares and, of course, the private shares. And at that point, the private equity folks decided, we're going to close the London office. This is too expensive. We don't need to have this fancy London headquarters. So we're just going to close this thing. And I had to make a choice at that point. Do I move with Samsonite and the new private equity owners to wherever they were going to move it, or do I try to stay in London? I decided to try to stay in London. And also, my daughter had been in school there already. We had friends. We had built a life. But it was really hard to stay in London. So I worked for a year at a London-based law firm. And actually, while I was there, I also took the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Test, which qualifies you to be a solicitor of England and Wales. So I'm actually also a qualified solicitor. So because I thought, well, if I want to stay, I need to do that. So I became a qualified solicitor. But at the time, and this was right after the crash, and it was really hard to find someone who was willing to take a chance on an American lawyer who had just qualified as a solicitor, for a role in London. I ended up at a small boutique law firm, worked there for a year, realized I need to get back in-house right away because law firm life was not for me. But it was, again, great experience. It was a reminder of what I had left behind when I went to General Motors all those years ago, did that for a year. And all this time, I had kept up my networking. And once again, a recruiter, this time from MLA, once again, this was a role that had some hair on it, okay? It was to become the general counsel of Dentsply, which is a company based in York, Pennsylvania. They had 3 unsuccessful candidates already. The search had gone on for 3 years. They couldn't find anybody. They
couldn't yet find anybody.
They were really having trouble, and so they finally scraped the bottom of the barrel. They found me, and they said, "Oh, you're perfect. You'll do anything, So we picked up and moved to York, Pennsylvania from London, and I became the general counsel of Dentsply, which was now a truly, public company with institutional investors, a proper governance, board of directors. Things work the way they're supposed to from a governance point of view. But of course, the experiences I had at Samsonite were still just so valuable to come into it's almost like if I hadn't had those crazy experiences, I wouldn't have known how normal is, right? So anyway, spent 5 years at Dentsply, great experience, amazing, learned a ton about being a public company GC. I mean, I was not a securities lawyer, so I kind of learned on the job. But I would say that during that 5 years is when I really learned that area of the law. And then Dentsply got bought or merged with another company. So during the course of the merger negotiations, once again, I got approached cold call by a recruiter who was looking for my current role in Chicago, and the timing was just perfect because we were about to announce a merger. It was clear that the management team that I was working for was not going to be the management team of the merged company, and so the timing just worked out really, really well. And then I moved to Hill-Rom, and I've been there for 3 years. So I'm really sorry I took up that much time, but it's a long story. And
Okay, that's amazing. Kristin and Deborah, it just goes to show that there's no one path to GC, right? Fascinating. And I want to thank Benesch for having us today. This is really lovely. And thank you all for coming. I see so many familiar faces in the audience and some friends. So my name is Meredith Ritchie. I'm currently GC of Alliant Credit Union, located in Rolling Meadows. Alliant used to be United Airlines Employees Credit Union. So that is the legacy. About 5 United employees started the credit union in 1935 with, I think, pooled monies together totaling maybe $5,000. And now it's an $11 billion financial cooperative. So I've been there 11 years, and I'll go back to the beginning of my career, but I started at Alliant as assistant general counsel, associate general counsel, also with duties of compliance and ethics, and then moved to the GC role about 5 or 6 years ago. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, went to Hamilton College in upstate New York, and majored in comparative literature and French. And then you say, why? And however, I was very interested in broadcasting. So I did radio shows in college and had some internships here at ABC and a few radio stations, and was really sort of going down that path until Really, when I sent out the demo tapes, sort of the offers I was getting at that point in time were chasing tornadoes in Florida and Georgia. And I wanted to come back to Chicago, right, a major market. So I took a deep breath and said, well, now that I'm actually in an apartment with somebody who had been a close friend from high school and have to pay rent, I better figure out another path to pay rent. So I took a job as a paralegal with a very small law firm in Chicago, and during the first 6 months, the partner in charge said, you know, you really get law. I mean, really, you should just take the LSAT and go to law school. So I did, and went to a local school, DePaul. And during that time, you know, worked at different law firms in Chicago while at DePaul. An offer was made to me during the final year at DePaul, which I was thrilled with, to work at a firm here in Chicago and do tort litigation. And I really enjoyed that for 4 years. And then I happened to be at a high school football game, my husband's alma mater, and I was sitting next to a man who at the time worked at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and was chatting and said, you know, oh gosh, you know, your past 4 years have been interesting, but you know, we always could use good people at the State's Attorney's Office. And so if you ever want, this was on a Saturday, if you ever want to make a change and do something different, give me a call. Well, you know, I thought about it for about 24 hours, and I thought, you know, to really get great litigation experience and to have a different experience, now is the time in my life to do that before I get too entrenched in any one thing. So on Monday, I called him. And so then that led to time at the State's Attorney's Office, and I see Kathy Hatzaris, who was my office mate at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, also a successful in-house attorney now. And so spent some time there, and then also, so did civil and criminal. Did that for about 2.5, 3 years, and I was sitting in my desk at the time, just about to go on to felony review, which at the time was sort of a thrill. You know, you got to wear jeans, which back in the day was sort of a big thing. And had a pager. Does anybody know what that is? And then you basically, you know, went either to the scene of the crime or the jail or the local police department and went to the lockup. So it was all very exciting. So I was about to go into that when my former colleague, the person who hired me at the State's Attorney's Office, who now worked for the state, called and said, okay, Meredith, I really need you over here at the state of Illinois. I need some help. And I said, you know, I'm just about to go into felony review, so thank you, but I can't do that right now. So he was persistent. He called back 3 months later and he said, have you gotten that out of your system? And I said, sure, okay, sure. I've done that, you know. So then I did go over to the state of Illinois, at the time, Illinois Department of Public Aid, and their contract department needed to be revamped. So worked with him and the staff there to redo the contract department and staff and contracts. I won't go into too much detail there. So then I was there for, I don't know, maybe 4 or so years. During that time, had a baby. And then I got a call from a managing partner at a local law firm in Chicago who actually knew me through the Bar Association, Illinois State Bar Association. And he said, you know, Meredith, I know you've really been involved with contracts for a while, and there's a great opportunity. And this gets back, by the way, the theme here is networking and keeping your contacts, and also outside counsel helping sort of in-house. And I consider government sort of quasi-in-house. So anyways, he said, listen, there's a great opportunity at Central Management Services, which is also a state agency, and they need a deputy general counsel of procurement. He said, I think it's a great opportunity, and I think you'd be perfect for the role. Are you interested? And I said, yep, I would love to apply. So that sort of started the ball rolling. Went to then become Deputy General Counsel at CMS and stayed there for probably a good 4 years. learned a lot about not only government, but again, sort of honed my skills in terms of business and procurement and contracts. Then I decided that, I needed to go back into the private sector. I really was thrilled with my government service, but time to go back private. So I conducted a search, and I ended up and actually this was sort of interesting because I went online, and you always ask, well, how many times do you ever find a job just by going online? And there was an ad for Accenture looking for state and local government counsel. And I thought, oh, I have state government experience, I have local government experience, this may be a fit. So I did go to work for Accenture and worked on contracts to help the business. Basically, when they were bidding on government work outside of Illinois, then I would help them either with the negotiations or answer the RFP, so on and so forth. Was there for about 2 years. Great learning experience. Again, really that was the experience where I could figure out what corporate life was all about and business and how a public company worked. After about 2 years there, I decided it was time to move on, conduct another search. So this time through a headhunter, learned about Alliant Credit Union, who was looking for an associate general counsel. So I'm sparing you some of the details of all this, but long story short, I ended up at Alliant, and it's been 11 years, and have had a great experience there. And maybe we can get into later how I went from AGC to GC. But the bottom line there is, and us panelists had a little discussion beforehand about, and I don't want to give anything away, but about sort of, selling yourself and not being afraid to let people know what you want and having ambition. And so I made that known and did get the GC role, and it's been a really interesting experience. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, hi, everybody. I will make this I'll give you the quick overview because my career differs from that of my illustrious co-panelists, and I too also want to really say thank you to Benesch. I see so many friendly faces, and that's saying a lot for these eyes, so that's great. But I think the takeaways from my career path are that having started, I went to college at a time when I was determined as a young woman I was going to be able to provide for myself and had sort of a defined track to do that. I was going to and I did pursue a finance degree, although my family will attest numbers really are not my thing. So I was kind of really working against the grain there, and then decided, since I wasn't going to Wall Street, to pursue a law degree and be a corporate lawyer. The courtroom never called to me. I hate with a passion arguing and disagreeing, so I saw corporate law as a means of really playing to my strengths of building relationships, really creating companies, creating relationships. I'm a Chicagoan, born and bred. If I keep talking, you'll really hear that loud and clear. And so was here, went to a firm that really was the predecessor firm of what's now Neil Gerber. And at the time, coming out of law school, and I'm dating myself just as some of us did, I know this will shock you. You went with the intention that you were going to stay there. You were essentially joining another family, that was going to be your permanent home. And did corporate securities work, was the first person to make partner working a flex schedule while I raised my kids, and I was so lucky and so fortunate. Was always very involved in recruiting, continued doing recruiting for my alma mater. I interviewed for Northwestern Law. You're starting to see a theme here. But enjoyed my practice. There were some structural changes at the firm. I lost a very close friend and mentor very suddenly, And that changed the landscape for me. And I was also approaching a birthday that was significant. So starts, these life events come together. And so I said, is this where I want to spend the rest of my life and what I'm doing? And so, so unlike me, I took a total leap and joined a friend who had a small recruiting boutique who had been recruiting me over the years and finally said, this is time to do it. As I look back, it literally was jumping off a building without a parachute. I mean, going from a partner's draw to full commission without really understanding what that was going to be like. But I had confidence in my skills and thought, this is going to be great. And so now, all these years later, I look back, I brought with me 15 boxes of form files. Yes, we had paper files at the time, and was very happy to say I really have not looked at them and finally did ditch them at about year 15 into this career. So, and I recycled them, don't worry, saving trees.
They didn't spark joy.
That was what, exactly. I think I did keep a couple closing books. Maybe those we'll have to see what we do with. And was at this boutique. So I've recruited associates, I've moved partners, I've opened offices, I did in-house work, and by virtue of networking and just again life's confluence of events, I moved to Major Lindsey's in-house group about 3 years ago. And so that's my focus, but I love being in Chicago and I love continuing to network and leveraging that network and relationships. And my whole goal is to try to help people. So I still help partners, associates, but the focus is on in-house. And I think the themes that we've heard here are, be open to opportunities, be friendly, meet people, talk to people. You never know where that's going to lead. And I think I've been happy to report that also your recruiter can be your friend. So I will leave it there. There's a lot more to say, but I know that we have other topics to cover too.
Actually, Mindy, as a director of one of the largest recruiting firms, MLA, can you actually, a lot of us in the room want to know, what does it take to get that chief legal officer, that job? What do you look for in candidates when you're hiring for companies that have hired you to find their new CLO or their GC?
So that's a great question, and it really defines and tells you the difference. It's interesting. First of all, I think Meredith is so smart. Did you hear her say the words? She conducted a search for herself, 2 or 3 times. She was intentional, and you went out and made things happen. Being on the in-house side, and to answer your question, for as much as I think of individuals and candidates as my clients, and that's how I operate, at MLA, the client is the company looking to hire. And so I have a set of parameters that I'm trying to fill, and really, when I look at it, the client, I'm trying to solve their problem. And I use problem in air quotes. There's an opening, there's an opportunity, maybe somebody's left, maybe it's a new role, maybe there was a merger. And so I have to start with those parameters. I think a lot of the value that my colleagues and I bring is that we can tease those parameters and stretch that parameter. There are certainly going to be certain technical skills, experiential skills. Sometimes an employer can be very particular about credentials, but most of the time it's going to be the technical skills, the interpersonal skills, looking for the ever amorphous cultural fit, right? So we tease that out a lot, and it's just really having sort of a sixth sense when you talk to people, reading body language, reading what they say on paper, listening very intently, listening to what you all want, right? It's really important to listen to that and to try to bring about a fit. I hope that's responsive.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And I know you mentioned that there was a problem that needs to be solved. So does it make sense then for candidates to show how they can sort of solve that problem and that it's more about the company and not them? I know when we talked, you mentioned something about that.
Absolutely. There are a lot of times when, and again, you all have your career objectives, you want to get somewhere, you want to accomplish certain things, and most recruiters absolutely want to help you do that. But again, working off of this parameter list, sometimes you're not going to have those qualities. And I think it's fascinating to hear about litigators who have gone in and become corporate and learned securities. So when I'm looking at a list that says, well, there's going to be governance and securities, that's obviously something I'm going to look for. But there are analogous situations. Tell me about times where you've learned something that wasn't in your job description, where you raised your hand and you jumped in. I love Kristin's analogy of the jump ball. You know, be that player. You see an opening, create an opportunity, gain skills in that way, and show that it's about filling the role. And to finish out the situation, it's not going to all be about, well, there's so many times I hear candidates say, well, I want to be a general counsel and I want to do this and this is why I'm perfect for the role. That's great, and again, I really want to help you, but I've got to think about how you fit what the company is looking for. So help me see that picture, and that's what I try to get you to talk about and share with me.
Thanks, Mindy. How about Kristin? I know that, we've all heard that there's a process to get to your seat at the table. Can you tell us, and I know you're probably interviewing other in-house counsel to kind of work up the chain or to help support you. Can you tell us what you look for, since some of our folks aren't necessarily ready to hop into a GC position, what you're looking for when you're considering candidates to work for you at US Foods, and in answering that, maybe was there something as a part of your career that you're looking for that you know is helpful, or are you identifying folks who could maybe, have your seat someday, or at least be prepared for that position at some point?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you my answer, and then for kicks, I'm going to give you the answer that my direct reports gave me this morning when I gave them this pop quiz. So I definitely, I hire for smart, so I'm looking for smart people. But then kind of the intangibles are intellectual curiosity, humility. I like people with a sense of humor. Optimism is actually pretty important in an in-house role. I think ability to roll with the punches, things like that. But let me read you, because we had I kicked off a sort of extremely long text string this morning when I gave them. I said, pop quiz, send me adjectives that describe people I like to hire. The first response was handsome. But they got a little more serious after that. I got down to earth, humble, decisive, to the point, forward thinking, self-starters, team players, active listeners, smart, self-starters came up again, confident, hardworking, independent, ethical, practical, good perspective, collaborative, business-focused. And then they started teasing each other. I got creativity and originality, strong, interesting personalities. And then there was some grammar comments. So it goes on and on. I think I have actually, in writing job descriptions with HR people, I have in the past said that I'm looking for Mary Poppins. I don't know if any of you remember when Jane and Michael Banks create their description of what they're looking for, which does not look like what Mr. and Mrs. Banks were looking for. And there's sort of this long list of fun qualities, and it feels like we always sort of start with that, where I'm looking for the moon. But I think some of them are maybe not obvious to people. It's not. The resume is what gets you in the door. Who you are is what gets you the job.
That's great. Thanks, Kristin. Now, I know we both, Meredith, have criminal background experience, which surprisingly for me, I know proved helpful in my career path. It obviously did for you. And I know folks in the audience, some have government experience, some have done more transactional, some have been litigators, some have been employment lawyers. Like, what, I guess, is there something key that they should highlight when they're applying for an in-house position and you know, whether it be another in-house counsel position or a GC position?
Okay. Thank you. So, yes, and it was interesting because I was sort of looking at this list of all the nice things I would love for people to have. But it is nice, I think, and helpful to have sort of diversity in the background as far as what you've done. Of course, it depends on the role, right? So sometimes you do need somebody to be more of a subject matter expert, and sometimes you need somebody who's had various experience. So sort of depends on the role, so not to try to get out of the question. I'm probably a little bit biased because of the different because of the litigation and the contracts and government. I probably take a second look at those resumes because I'm interested in what they've done, but that doesn't mean that that's the only path.
Thank you. And Deb, I definitely want you to answer the question, but maybe just for something different for folks, like how do you make it known that you want that GC role? Like how, whether it be internally within your company, if you want to move from a lower level position to the higher level position, or externally, like how do you get in touch with a recruiter, or it sounds like a recruiter found you oftentimes, but what advice can you give to the audience on those points?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, I don't think you can just sort of march into your GC's office and say, I want your job. That's probably not a good way to start. You know, so I don't know. It's. I mean, I guess what we were talking about before, it's not so much saying I want to be a GC, right? It's more saying I'm an ambitious person, right? I want to grow. I want to be a leader. I want to have a seat at the table, right? I want to be in the room where it happens. Like that, I think that's the mindset to me, not so much, you know, I want this role at this company at this time. And then, you know, just knowing that and not being embarrassed to say that's kind of where I want to get to, and that's, you know, not a bad thing. And how am I going to get there? You know, I mean, for me, the recruiters have always found me, but it's always been because I did a lot of work beforehand, you know, seeding it, right? I mean, I would set up meetings with people. Like when I moved from GM to Samsonite, which was a big move. Well, actually, I was thinking about this. One of the reasons I left GM was that I actually wanted that jump ball. You know, I wanted the jump ball. And I used to do that. I used to go into the GC or the assistant GC who I was working for and say, hey, you know, I can do more. You know, I have an idea. I see a problem over there, and this thing is a mess, and they could really use some help. Why don't you let me drop a couple of the other things I'm doing, and I'll take that on full time. Like a 6-month project. You know, I'd get all excited about it and say, I can make a difference. And the attitude was kind of, you know, stay in your lane, you know. And after a couple times of that, I thought, you know, I don't think this is the place I really want to stay. It's been a great experience, but I don't think I want to stay here. And so it took about a year, you know, of reaching out. I reached out to all my law school classmates, you know, people I had interacted with at outside law firms, all kinds of people. And I said, I'm looking for my next opportunity. And so how it came about was that a recruiter had approached a friend of mine, and she wasn't interested in the role. And she said, hey, it's a bit of a stretch, but this friend of mine, actually it was a friend of my sister's law school classmate. So that's how I went that far into the network. And she said, and so she told this recruiter, you really should talk to this woman because I think you're going to like her. And that was the guy who came to Ann Arbor, and I met him, and you know the rest is history. But it took about a year to get to that point, and that's kind of been the story over and over.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think I actually think you can go into your boss and say, I want your job. But I wouldn't go in and say, I want a title. I want a promotion. I think that's sort of a turnoff. I think what you're trying to do is identify what your professional hopes and aspirations are. And your aspirations might be to do exactly what you're doing today, just do it better. That's okay. But if you have an ambition to do something else, it shouldn't be, I just want a bigger title. And frankly, I think folks in our roles are not really all that interested in hearing that. We're not in the business of handing out titles. We're in the business of providing a legal service, and you're there to help us get that done. And so if we can achieve both objectives at the same time, so if Stephanie, you said, look, I've been in employment law for a while, but I really feel like I need to spread my wings, and I'd like to see if there are things that are adjacent to that. I think you could very easily go, I don't know what that's what you actually you do transportation law, but that was just an example. But I think, look, I think what I've encouraged my teams to do, and we sometimes use like an actual individual development plan form, and sometimes I don't care how you do it, write it on a napkin if you want, but just sort of be thoughtful before you ask for that conversation of what exactly is it really that you want. Do you want more experience? Do you want more responsibility? Do you want more exposure to senior people? Do you want to go off and learn something new? Do you want a 6-month project? I would kill for people who came into my office and offered what you did. And instead, what happens with a little bit more frequency is like, well, what are you going to do for me? And I think you have to sort of put yourself in sort of the GC's role. Imagine if I went into the CEO's office and said, "When are you going to promote me?" That's crazy talk. So we're responsible for our own careers just as much as you are. And I think putting in the time to really figure out what is it that I would like to do this year, next year, the year after that, and then who are the people around me that I'm going to ask for help.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Kristin, really dovetails with what Mindy had said about also just identifying problems within the company that you can solve and other hats you can wear that can benefit the company. Mm-hmm. And same with some of the things that Deb and Mindy said as well, and Meredith.
I was going to say too, and I think you guys are onto something. There's nothing wrong with having a development conversation. In fact, I would imagine most do, right? You've got your performance. Hopefully, most everybody is having weekly one-on-ones. And when there's conversation about development, show really what it is you aspire to. And also, I think most people have some sort of a talent review. I don't know whether most people use sort of a 9-box rating. And, if you make it known that you want to be high potential or that you think you have what it takes to be high potential, the more you sort of plant that seed, the better. But then also have what you need to back it up, right? So volunteering for these projects or following through. Yeah, there is nothing more frustrating than offering somebody an opportunity and saying, this is a phenomenal opportunity for you, if you could get this done within the next year. And then if it doesn't get done, then that's disappointing for the leader.
Mindy, I think everybody in this room is probably thinking about, where they want their career to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. For people who maybe aren't ready to make a move today, but think down the road they might want to make a move, do you have any tips for things that people could do now? For people to take action items away from this seminar? Things that they could do now to sort of further develop their careers and put themselves in a position where they could ultimately get to that GC seat? Sure.
Well, first of all, there's such a wide range of talent in this room and positions. So I'll do my best to generalize because it's such an individual question. First of all, before you leave, reach out, make some new friends, make some new contacts here. You never know who knows who's looking, as Deb's story illustrates. That is just my, probably my top tip, is just reach out. And on a related note, that's why I treat people with kindness and respect everywhere you go and at every level. I mean, that's so fundamental. But there are times that people come into our office and, frankly, in a couple of instances will be rude to our receptionist. It's an audit. It's just, okay, common sense. So let's start with the fact that common sense rules here. I think that, as Kristin pointed out, there are a lot of different paths and a lot of different questions to be asking yourself. So take some quiet time, look around, and think about what it is you want to do. How do you want to improve? What skills do you want to expand? Think about what's been said here. It's not always a straight line. So don't necessarily stay focused straight ahead of you. Talk to people. Look on LinkedIn and see who's doing something that looks interesting. That might be someone who might be a law school colleague, a former colleague at another company, at a firm. Talk to your outside counsel. You don't have to be so blatant as to say, I'm going to move, but it's about, I want to keep growing. I want to keep developing as a business partner. That to me is the ultimate sort of header here in all the characteristics we're talking about, because really in-house the goal is to solve the business's problems, to know what the business is doing. So on a related note, if you're like me, and again, numbers may not be your best friend, go take a class or two. If your company will pay for it, if your firm will pay for it, become facile and understand what financial statements are telling you. And while that's mostly in a public company context, but if you're going to work in a private company, you'll have access to that too. And that's really financial literacy, and comfort is really, I think, an important skill. And just be open. Have conversations, meet people. I know we all get busy with our days, but try to go out, meet people for lunch, find out what people are doing. It's just a way of expanding your horizons.
Deb, as people are thinking about ways that they would like to broaden their experience or get different expertise, and they want to go in and have their meeting with their supervisor, be it the general counsel or someone even below the general counsel, can you give advice to people about sort of how they would have that conversation? How do you approach that subject for further experiences you'd like to have?
Yeah, about sort of broadening your experience. I don't know. Can I pivot it a little bit and talk about the other question? Because what I was thinking about was that for me, my take, having had 3 different GC positions and having been interviewed for many more than that, one thing they're really looking for is that you really know and understand the business, and that you're interested in the business strategy, and that you have a really good sense of the direction of the business and the performance, and what are the drivers there. And sometimes it can be hard, I think, as an in-house lawyer, especially if you're in a group like litigation, or if you're an IP lawyer, or if you're, to get that broader perspective about the business. But I think if you want to become a GC, after all, it's called a general counsel, right? You're going to be part of the senior leadership team. And so what's always benefited me is that, well, first of all, I'm interested in the business. I have an intellectual curiosity about what's going on. Why are we doing this? What are the strategies? I'm always interested in it. But also by having so many different experiences within the company, doing the logistics job, working for a joint venture in Dayton, Ohio, doing, manufacturing, M&A, whatever would come your way, you get to know and understand the business. There are obviously different ways to do that, but that's one thing that I think is really important, because I think if you could be a brilliant litigator and probably make a fabulous general counsel, but if you go into the interview and you're not really able to talk, the people don't see you sitting at the executive leadership team table and talking about business strategy generally. They can't see you sitting in that role. You're probably not going to get the job. And so that's what I found. My conversations with these recruiters, my friends, have almost always been not about the legal skills, it's always been about the business, and so that's.
Just building on that for one quick second, and we've talked a little bit about moving up as in-house counsel. When firm lawyers and when you raise the litigation, I think that's a really good springboard to illustrate the point. There are times we'll get resumes from litigators, and litigators, I think, are so well equipped to be in-house lawyers because they have to learn new areas. They're learning new businesses all the time. But when we get resumes where it's just a case list of represented X company in X billion-dollar lawsuit, successful outcome, that doesn't tell me a lot about your role, how you played, what role you played in building the case strategy, getting to the settlement. It's just a long list. So try to shift and think about it from that perspective of, you're playing to the business audience. How do you put it into that vernacular?
Yeah.
Sorry. Just
When
wanted to-
solve your GC's problem. I mean, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've noticed we're really looking to grow in Asia Pacific, whatever it is, there's a little bit of a hole there. I'd like to really try, I'm not talking about going and traveling there on an expat package, but maybe I could fill in on that a little bit. Maybe I could learn a little bit about that, kind of help support that business, jump in on something. It depends on your boss. At GM, that probably would not have flown. But in my department, I would say, that's the kind of way I think you can broaden your experience, which then just helps you get to that next level. So I think most GCs, and speak for anybody, but are just thrilled to have somebody step up and say, I've noticed there's a gap here. I'd love to fill that gap. I think I can add value. I think here's what, I can do X, Y, Z. I can help this business, and I've thought it through. It's like, absolutely, please, go do it,
Kristin, when you and I talked in preparation for our session today, one of the things we talked about was trying to get people to sort of leave with an action item. Do you have suggestions for people, things they could do in the nearer term, when they walk out today that would help them develop their careers?
Yeah, so what I told Dawn, so U.S. Foods is a food service distributor. We distribute food everywhere, maybe even here. I don't know. I should have checked before I got here. We have an app for that. Someone over there,
Wanna always check.
we have 3 U.S. Foodsy people over here, one alum. Anyway, so what I was talking about is the Women in Food Service Forum. So there's this giant women's event, and we send some hundreds of people there every year, and the company for years had sent women without really, I think, but not very intentionally. So sort of women were like, yay, you get to go to Texas for this meeting. And so what we did last year was really try to prepare, number one, be pretty thoughtful about who got nominated and who was able to attend the event, but then talk with them before they went to the event about what are you trying to accomplish when you go, and then when we were there, sort of leave with a sense of what am I going to do with this when I go back to the office? Because I mean, it happens to me too. I don't get out much, so it's kind of fun to be here today, but I'll go to something and think that was great, or I heard someone who was really inspiring, and I'll take notes and then I'll lose them, and I'll immediately get back to the office and have 500 things to do. And my former boss, Eddie Lampert, used to call it the whirlwind. I'd get caught back up in the whirlwind. So the long-winded suggestion that I had for Dawn is that you all actually take out your little pads of paper and write down, okay, what was it that I heard here that kind of sparked my attention? It doesn't have to be exactly the thing that we brought up, but what was it that I heard Mindy say, or that I heard Meredith say, or Deb say, that makes me think, you know what, I'm going to go back and whatever, volunteer for a project, or I'm going to go home and think about who I want to be when I grow up, and maybe it's I want to be a recruiter, or I want to be a different kind of lawyer, or maybe it's I'm not happy with my company because it's like GM and doesn't give me an opportunity to stretch in the way I want to stretch. But I think it would be helpful for you to think about what that means to you. I mean, I think the theme we all heard was this kind of, don't be so risk averse. Be willing to take some leaps that maybe seem a little crazy. Like I went to be the General Counsel of Sears. Some number of people. I mean, we didn't even talk about that, right? I mean, and what was so actually, I'm going to totally tangent for like 1 second on that, because what was very interesting, and you probably had the same experience, was that was the different reactions I had from people. I had some people who said, "Why would you ever do that?" you have this wonderful job. There was one guy, quote, you have this great job at Brunswick and you just phone it in for the next 15 years. And I was like, that really sounds so horrible. I don't even know what to say to you. But so that was one reaction. And then I had other people saying, that sounds amazing. That's going to be so interesting. I'm like, yes, that's why I took it. I had a massive, massive team. I ran internal audit. I started off with, 150, 160 people on my team, and it was a crazy new day every single day, and so that's just a life experience you can't get anywhere.
On that theme, I have to mention, because I just listened to an interview, and I can't remember her name. Maybe somebody here listened to it. It was on a podcast. She was the former litigator at Quinn Emanuel, who then left to start her own boutique. It was a little bit...
Faith Gay.
Faith, yes.
She's a law school classmate.
Okay.
She's fabulous.
So there was an interview with her, and she said, and she's one of the most successful female litigators of all time, right? And they interviewed her, and she's our age. So she said, they asked her how she had done it, and she said one of the things she did is she took cases that nobody else wanted. She took cases that were considered dogs. They were losers, they had problems, they were really hard, they were a slog, they were, and that just really resonated with me, because I thought, I'm not saying, do the dirty work, but there is something to someone who runs towards the fire, right? That I think it benefits you, it benefits your employer, and you get to be known as someone who really takes on the hard tasks, and you learn so much, et cetera. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting story. Yeah.
One other point I'll just make, one takeaway that I'd like to highlight for everybody, and I'm generalizing here. I realize I'm generalizing. Go with me on this. Women, by far, more so than men, feel this thread of loyalty and affiliation and identification with our families. Maybe on par with men on that. But in your professional lives, women tend to feel a little more reluctant. They're caretakers in their own professional lives for their law firms, for their companies, et cetera. And I think another theme that you're hearing here is, while yes, I've stressed to get into the GCC, you have to solve the company's problem. As you think about your own career, take care of yourself and be willing to invest in yourself and make the time to make new connections, to look outside the box that you've been given as far as this is what your role is, and be open to recruiter conversations. I sort of missed the softball there when you said, what should people do to improve their careers? You can tell. Just talk to recruiters, right? Get on our radar screens. Let us know you're there and that you're thinking about it, and we can sometimes help get you to the next point. It may not be the straight path, but there are times we can get you to a Samsonite, which gets you to the GC perch of a public company. But really, sometimes I think we just get on a path of taking care of our families, taking care of our companies, and you have to be open to what does that mean to take care of yourself, and that means being open and thoughtful.
And so building on that theme, if you'll let me for a minute. Okay. Right. So I think some of the takeaways I would have, and it builds upon what everybody here has said, but, as Mindy said, do know recruiters. So Mindy has helped me on the client side, right? So she helped me fill a chief compliance officer role and did a phenomenal job, and we're very happy with the person. So thank you for that. And so obviously this concept of staying in touch. Margot O'Donnell has also been a huge help, and she's a partner at Benesch, so she does a lot of our work, but also, we've co-authored articles and sat on panels together, and so, outside counsel can be really helpful for you, and maybe it's just even having a conversation about your aspirations or offering to do, to co-author an article, and this concept of credentialing. So that's another thing. Maybe make a commitment to yourself in the next year that you're going to co-author an article or do a speaking engagement, in addition to, of course, I know all the other things you're doing. And sometimes, it must sound like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I need to do. But don't lose sight of the fact that you are doing it for yourself, you're helping other people, but you're doing it for yourself for a particular purpose. And it might mean saying no to things that could be static. So you also need to sit down and say, okay, I'm on 10 different committees. Are there any of these are there some committees that I've been on it for 5 years, maybe I don't need to be on it anymore. Maybe it's not helping me focus. I've done all I can do, so I really need to focus on things that are going to help me get to the next level. But that's something you have to kind of sit down and think about. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There's a book that I just read too called The One Thing by Gary Keller, who's sort of a well-known real estate broker. And it was one of these things. Nobody recommended it. I was in one of those Hudson bookstores at the airport, and I needed something to read, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a break on the plane. I'm not going to just read business information. I'm going to do something for myself. And I love these sort of development books. And it was such a good book because it was really talking about this concept of prioritizing. And yeah, you may have 30 things to do during the course of a day, but what is the one thing or the three things that are so important for you, and carve out time to do it. So just food for thought.
Thank you very much. We're actually going to give the audience, if anybody has any questions, I've got one right here.
Thanks. Thanks for talking to us today. So I'm curious about, I think sometimes I've heard, especially if you're in a large company, like your experience with GM, I love the jump ball idea. I don't see the jump ball idea too much being in a larger company. In a smaller company, I think
It can be really crazy.
it can be great, right? And I was asking all kind of employee benefit questions because I had children and I was the only one that did, and suddenly I got all the employee benefit legal questions. But hey, that's okay. It was broadening, right? But then I've also heard, being in a large company, that sometimes doing exactly what you did, which was going to London, going to Pennsylvania, wherever, or overseas is a great way to get ahead. You must have a very understanding family. So if one doesn't, and you're in a big market like Chicago where a lot of people want to be, sometimes those opportunities seem pretty few and far between. So any thoughts on those, either you or our recruiter
Let's
friend?
talk husbands, should we?
Or spouses, right?
Spouses,
Partners.
I'm sorry. Yes, good point. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I'm not sure I know what the question is. I don't want to talk about my spouse.
No, but I mean, I think that's a hugely important aspect of this, right? Because, we all have families, whatever kind of family it is. You have ties, you have parents, you have siblings, you have other connections and ties, and I mean, there's no question that has to work, right? And it doesn't always work, and it's not always easy. I mean, in my case, I was lucky, really lucky, that my husband basically gave up his career, to follow me around the world. He kind of repurposed his career and ended up becoming a contractor / consultant where he works from home and does a lot of what he had been doing in the corporate world, but doing it, on a contract basis, and has been able to do that, remotely. But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question. It's not easy. And I, personally, I mean, this is a whole nother subject. I actually think there's a lot of discussion out there, right, about female professionals and their child care responsibilities and maybe elder care responsibilities. That's a big subject that's discussed a lot. How can we make child care better? Parental leave policies. We don't talk about the partner issue. It's something we never talk about, and I actually think that is more important than the child care, because child care is available, and also your kids are always going to be your kids. If you're a mom, you're not divorcing your kids, right? You're going to make it work somehow. The partner question is a really interesting one, and it's delicate, and that's all I'll say about it.
Well, I think, okay. So what I think,
Let's dial down into that, right? So I have a great husband, nice guy, whatever, right? But he has a career, and he's very supportive, right? Be careful who you marry, right? I get it. I've been there, done that, right? But, we live in a big city like Chicago, and he has a career too. And he says, hey, if you go to rural Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania or California, what do I do? How does my career move? And I get it, right? If he does the same, how does that work, right? But I'm curious to know, so you're stuck in Chicago, better or for worse, and it seems like there are opportunities here. So how do you find them, knowing you're probably limited geographically, right? But there still must be opportunities for many of us that maybe don't have
First of all, okay, we're not stuck in Chicago. This is a great city, okay? Let's start there. I am a huge booster, but I get your point, okay? I hear you, and I'm just kibitzing with you on that. But the great news is you are stuck in Chicago, and there are tons of opportunities. And I put on the sheet, look around, right? It may not be a straight path. And by virtue of Deb's analogy, it may not be that you have to go geographically somewhere else, but you may have to, kudos to you for raising your hand and getting involved and expanding your expertise to include the benefits. I wouldn't stop there. I'd obviously go to gain other skills. And sometimes it might mean, there are a lot of times people, if I raise a role with them, people say, well, it's the same title, it's really lateral. Try to look at it, it's not always lateral. There are so many different ways to package it. I think of it as a big picture frame with puzzle pieces. And there's a bank account piece, and those of you who have talked to me have heard this already, so just go, be patient. But there are bank accounts, there's dollars that you're bringing home and you're putting into JP Morgan, because I saw someone here from there, and that's my bank, so. But there are also spouse satisfaction, geographic restrictions, title, responsibilities, cultural fit, path to the GC, language, reporting structure. You can play with so many pieces, so be open. So to your point, I'll ask you, leverage your law school network, leverage your undergrad network. I often say you paid for those degrees, those career services offices should continue to work for you, and they often do. But there are also, get on recruiters' radar screens. Think about, read LinkedIn, see what's there. Again, talk to different people. Part of it is being open enough to see that there are other opportunities. I realize sometimes they don't always show up in your own inbox or on your phone, and sometimes you have to work to create them. Sometimes you create your own role. There are times the path isn't there, but by virtue of, it may not be a definite jump ball culture, but if you see an issue, work to get that added and try to create your own role or build a role that suits you. I hope that's helpful. You're asking a really tough question, but I think that what we said here, I think Kristin said optimistic people, and I do think I'm going to go back to that word stuck a little bit. Think about it. Think of how you're projecting it. Think of it as, try to shift it and think of it from a positive perspective of, I'm here in a gold mine. How can I go find it?
So shifting gears a little bit on the question, I think that to Kristin's point, we probably all find ourselves getting caught up in the whirlwind when we get back to work. And I'm just curious if any of you have any good real world practical advice on the best kind of networking events that you found yourself at that really helped you find a deeper connection, and then also how you sort of move from that, here's my business card and the intro email, into kind of that next stage of really trying to engage in a deeper relationship with people that you don't work with on the daily.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with a maybe slightly more negative comment. Sorry.
We're going positive, Kristin.
We're saying positive. I know. I don't love networking events. I don't really feel like they're a great use of time, to be honest. I think you ought to think about what are things you really like to do. What do you like to do? Would you like to be on a nonprofit board? Are you a knitter? Do you play lacrosse? I don't know. I mean, I don't think, I mean, I realize Deb finds jobs everywhere, and that is. But I think you ought to actually just start from a place of like, okay, you have a finite resource, and that's your time and your energy, and think about where you'd like to spend it. And I think you'll meet people along the way. I wouldn't necessarily go out looking for the networking opportunity. There are loads of people who've handed me their business cards over the years who I'd be perfectly happy to stay in touch with, but do I? I don't. And so I don't know that sort of formally networking in that kind of really strict networking way. I'm trying to think. I mean, one of the jobs I got, it's sort of similar to you. I think I knew the person who called me on the job because his son plays hockey, and so did mine. I don't know. I wasn't networking with him.
Well, I thought one thing you said that was interesting is you said, how do I form deeper relationships with these people? And see, I actually think that's one of the female things, which is we think that because we meet someone at a lunch, we have to immediately become best friends. We have to become friends. We have to like share our lives with each other. Actually, networking is shallow, and I think well, I mean, it doesn't have to be. It could become more, but I think that's okay. Like, I think there's a purpose to just meeting people because they're in your industry or because they are, share your profession, and that it's going to be a formal, shallow, nice to meet you, I see your title and your name, maybe I'll connect with you on LinkedIn. It doesn't have to go deeper than that, and I think that's fine. I think men have always known that these shallow relationships that may lead to something in the future is fine, and women think that we have to be best friends.
Wait, I have another idea, though. You just made me think of another idea. So I don't know exactly what you do, but if you can, the one thing I do think, and this isn't, maybe when I was thinking networking, it was like going to a party and handing people your cards. But the one thing that I found to be really handy, and is actually how I met you, is to connect with people who have the same job you have. So if you work for a company and you're the securities lawyer, there are tons of them in the Chicago area, find that little kind of kitchen cabinet so that you can connect with those people. Because we were in the same
the manufacturers
something group. Anyway, and so lawyers from businesses that had things in common all participated in this group. And it was terrific because you had companies that did similar things and people who had similar jobs. And so it was a very good use of time.
And we're not friends, you see.
And
so it's like,
and we never see each other. And I would refuse to have lunch with her, sit next to her at any event.
I think it's a great question, and I would sort of agree with all these different ideas. And in addition to that, there's opportunities here. So like Rebecca Collins, who's president of ACC, is sitting right behind you, and then we have representatives like Margot, who's past president of the Coalition of Women's Initiatives in Law, another great organization. So there's so many great organizations you could get involved with, but then also don't discount alumni groups, other affinity groups like these, manufacturing or compliance. There are a lot of compliance groups in Chicago that sort of get together frequently. And also, maybe it's there's the golfing groups for women. I mean, there's so many things where you can meet people. So, great question.
And just to finish it off, I would leverage off the comments. First of all, we can help you meet other people who are similarly situated and make those connections because, again, that helps people. And on the networking question, I agree, you don't have to become best friends, and I think it's a really interesting observation. But the flip side is become better at having coffee, right? Set yourself a half hour to just go meet somebody for a cup of coffee because that's a little bit more, at least then there's something to build on beyond, hey, I met you and I have your business card. You can establish some commonality because then if you do reach out, there's at least some relationship. And be careful about how you do it, right? And I say this without regard to who's here, what title. If you are a starting in-house lawyer, you probably should not reach out to the three people to my right, to my left. First, I've got to get directions right. But, as a blind reach out, they're busy women, But if you do meet them in a certain instance, be respectful of their time and the connections that you make. People want to help each other, but you also have to realize what is on different people's plates. I hope I'm saying that in a tactful way.
I've had law firm partners reach out to me and say, hey, there's this younger attorney who I'm working with, who I think, is trying to advance their career, and would you, have lunch with her? Would you kind of have coffee with her? And I've never said no. I mean, yeah.
Hi, I want to expand upon something that I heard Deb touch on. I work in the logistics industry, and I have for 10 years. And before I came in-house in logistics, I had never thought about or had any interest in logistics ever in my life. And one of the biggest challenges that I face is kind of understanding fully the conversation. I remember when I started, I had to download a dictionary of logistics acronyms just so I could really be aware of what everyone was talking about. And I was recently promoted to GC, and I find that those challenges still continue to some extent. So I think my question is, what do you think are the best resources to kind of get not just company knowledge, not just to understand the business strategy, but to understand kind of the industry that you're in and really understand the operations? Because I think that all of that is critical to really counsel the company properly.
Well, I'll jump in and I'll hand it over to Deb. So I would ask for help from some folks on your leadership team. I would bet that you have colleagues that you could go to and just say, hey, I was in the meeting and people were talking about this. I'm not sure exactly how that's calculated. Or, I often ask, I'm better at math than Mindy.
I'm not horrible.
But I still do. In fact, I had a call with my CFO this morning where I asked him to walk me through some math because we're about to hit proxy season. But I ask for help, and you're not going to sound not smart if you ask for that help. And then if your industry has any kind of industry groups, go to them. Get yourself invited to those kinds of things. Read their whatever the industry rag is. But I think asking people for help, they're actually quite willing to do it. And it has this sort of double purpose in that it builds relationships for you with people who are going to be important to you if you want to succeed in role.
Even asking your business partners what they read, right? What they read to stay current and right.
In a way, I feel like one of the benefits of getting to the GC role is that you can ask questions without looking dumb or something, mainly because you're not expected to know every single area, right? You're at a point you're not going to be a subject matter expert in everything. And so it actually is almost more acceptable to be able to go to a colleague and say, hey, I don't know a lot about, I don't know, the digital, insides of our products. Can you take me through that? And actually, yeah, I've done that. I've gone to our manufacturing plants and said, I want to take a tour. I want somebody to walk me through and explain to me how this actually works. I've had our CFO, actually, our previous CFO, when I first started, I really wanted to understand, just the financial drivers, overall of the company. And so I had him help me just create a little cheat sheet chart, which was, okay, by business unit, what was the revenue of each business unit, by product, by business unit, by region, profitability, margins, and I've kept that cheat sheet because, honestly, it's not that I'm bad at numbers, but they don't stick in my head. I'm not pulling up numbers all the time, right? But everybody else in the room is often sitting there and they're like, oh yeah, last quarter, the profitability of this particular segment in this region was X. I'm like, whoa, where did you get that? Right. So yeah, something like that, a little cheat sheet.
How does this work? Why is this important? How does it benefit us? And that's going to help you as you negotiate your agreements. You need to know what the key, so why is it important to you? What are the 3 business points that are most critical to you to get, and why? I think asking questions is absolutely understandable and encouraged, so good advice.
I think we'll take one last question right here, and then if people have additional questions and you want to stay for the meet and greet time, feel free to do that.
So one of the things that we are not taught is how to manage people. Okay, so I've never taken a course on it. It's not a CLE that I've attended. And so I want to understand, when you guys got like your first teams, how did you learn to manage them? And you know, have you changed over the course of your career your different management styles based upon, you know, the feedback? I love that you texted your people and were trying to get all of that feedback. I call it a 360. Like, I love that you got all of that. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your styles and how you learned it?
Sure, I'll take a shot. I think if you are, so for instance, if you have a new team or you're the new person on the block, you're just coming in, I think it's important for you to do sort of an assessment of your direct reports, right? And maybe, I mean, this works for me, but it may not work for everybody. Have weekly one-on-ones, understand what motivates them. You know, we use the Gallup organization and tools, so internal customer engagement and Strength Finder, and they have tools that you can actually use, sort of coaching tools, so that when you sit down with somebody, there's sort of a list of questions. And for somebody who might be new at it, it's a great guideline. So it's almost like you're sort of interviewing your direct report on how do they want to be recognized, you know, what motivates them, why do they like coming to work in the morning, and understanding their values, especially, as I understand, for millennials, they like to know they have a purpose and are doing something good and valuable. So so that's interesting too, to sort of take that into consideration. And then, and I'd love to hear what the other panelists think too, but having some team meetings, and it may depend on how large the team is and what the synergies are. But for me, having sort of weekly one-on-ones with key people or people on the team is important to building the relationship and making sure they stay motivated.
I think that's a really hard question. I've been sitting here thinking about it as you were talking. Nobody taught me how to be a manager. I didn't take a class. I didn't read a book. Unlike Cindy or Mindy, I don't really like the self-help books. I should read more of them. but I think having worked in different corporate cultures where the way people are considered and treated has been different. So I would say, I guess maybe I learned along the way. And so I'll use an example now. So US Foods has a very, I would say, fairly intense focus on culture. They have like very well-defined beliefs about how people are expected to behave in the workplace. And they take it really, really seriously. And so, you know, as a manager, that was an adjustment for me coming in, because I'd come from an environment that was a lot more chaotic, let me put it that way. And so it was much more about survival and kind of, I think, building trust with your team and then going out and doing. And I would say the US Foods way is much more about, it has a heavy culture around feedback. And so there's just a lot of discussion about recognizing folks and providing pretty much real-time feedback of what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And so kind of getting accustomed to the fact that we were going to be doing that a lot was new to me as a manager. I was not uncomfortable providing feedback, but it's a very sort of real-time thing that we do. And I guess the flip side of that is that, at least in my experience, US Foods, ladies, close your ears, we tend to also be just maybe a little bit more thin-skinned, interestingly, in this feedback culture. And maybe it's because there's more of it. I'm not sure. It can be hard to hear it. That's maybe not a great answer. I don't know how I learned to become a manager.
I think this
I
may
really
be.
don't.
I think this may be a subject for our next CLE.
The only thing, I'm not going to go on and on. The only thing I would say is it's really interesting when you started out, like in the first time I ever had direct reports was at Samsonite, if you don't count just sort of administrative staff. And, you know, I was definitely the youngest, right? So to go from being younger than most of your direct reports to becoming by far older than most of your, it's just an interesting journey. I don't know, you mature and grow. I mean, the only other thing I would say is I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all way, right? I mean, I do believe in being authentic to yourself and trying to not, you know, try to be other than what you are as a manager. And I don't know if that makes sense, but you know, there's always been, you know, there's all this talk about female management styles versus male management styles. We're too empathetic, we're too collaborative, we're too this, too that. My view is, no, actually, I'm gonna be the way that's comfortable for me, and if you don't like it, that's kind of your problem, not mine, because I'm kind of the manager. So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you very much. We want to be mindful of your time, and also thank you to the panelists for sharing their valuable time and advice. And thank you to Benesch for supporting B-Sharp and this event in particular. We want to hear from you what you think about this event and your ideas for future events, so please fill out this form in your materials. There's also a CLE evaluation form. And we have some giveaways as well, a B-Sharp tote bag. And our Labor and Employment Group also recently gave a CLE on HR in 2019. So if you'd like information on that, that's at the front as well. But feel free to stay and talk to the panelists if you have any further questions. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.